Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Build for iOS and Android using Visual Studio, presented by DevExpress Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. We have folks from all over the world joining us today: Poland, Austria, Australia, Germany, Michigan, and Pakistan, and so many more places, so welcome. In this session, see how to use Visual Studio to build an iOS and Android app in under an hour using DXTREME, the cool new tool set from DevExpress. Paul will walk you through how to use your favorite IDE to target multiple platforms, to leverage your existing skills to embrace the multi-channel world, and to dispatch deployment dilemmas. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but feel free to enter your questions or comments at any time in the questions section of your GoToWebinar control panel. I will now hand things over to Paul Usher.
Thanks, Amanda. Welcome, everyone. So I'm Paul Usher. I'm a technical evangelist here at DevExpress, based in Australia. And today we're going to look at building an entire application targeting iOS and Android using Visual Studio. We'll start by taking a look at what DXTREME is, and then have a brief discussion on some of the considerations when targeting mobile devices in particular. We're going to create an application from scratch, build and run it, and then step through the deployment processes. We've got a couple of frequently asked questions, and then we'll open up the floor to your questions. So as a developer, it's a pretty exciting, if not daunting, time out there. There's a large number of platforms, devices, operating systems, and emerging technologies. And certainly the question is, which one do you choose? Do you go native? Do you go hybrid? Or do you choose layered? We've got clients and management wanting more and more with less time. We've got people wanting to bring their own devices into enterprise and workplaces. So do you learn a whole new language, a new IDE, a new technology, and a new tool set? Do you work with frameworks that keep adding more and more layers of abstraction? Or do you look at something like HTML and JavaScript and using that within the comforts of Visual Studio? Now, one of the benefits of the HTML JavaScript option is that it provides true device independence. And with frameworks such as PhoneGap, you've got direct access to hardware such as GPS, camera, media, geolocation, etc. So DXTREME is a cross-platform framework that's designed to help you build that native-looking mobile app. The idea is that you can create one project, and by deploying it onto the relevant device, it will look and feel like it should. So I create an application and run it on an iPhone. It's going to look and feel like a native iOS application. If we take the same application and run it on an Android device, without you changing anything, it will look and feel like an Android application. We provide a rich set of tools and libraries built on the JavaScript and HTML framework, along with some project templates and wizards, such as the OData service wizard that we'll be looking at today. We also allow you to create an entire solution focused on Windows 8, mobile and web in a single package. Best of all, it's integrated with Visual Studio, both 2010 and 2012, allowing you to use productivity tools such as CodeRush and leaving you in an environment that you're already familiar with. Now, when you start building applications for mobile, there's a lot of things to consider. Think about the last time you're on the train or on a bus heading into work, maybe standing in the queue at the bank, and you pull out your mobile phone and jump into one of your favorite applications. How long did you actually spend in there? Was it just a few seconds or a few minutes? What benefits did that application give you? And what hardware considerations or functionality were you using? And one of the key considerations when you're designing mobile applications is how are you going to monetize your app? Are you going to be selling it on the App Store? Are you going to be using one of the many paid advertising streams, subscriptions, or in-app purchases? And these are all things that you need to think about when you start designing apps. If you want to target the Apple App Store, so you can hit devices such as the iPod, the iPad, and the iPhone, you need to pay an annual subscription, which is $99. You get to create a WDC, or Worldwide Developer Certificate, and then you need to create a provisioning profile for each application you generate. And remember that Apple will take 30% of every dollar that you earn. It's a similar story on the Google Play Store. You focus on devices such as the Galaxy tablet, the Nexus, or any of the large variety of phones that are out there running the Android operating system. The cost is only $25 per year, and the app provisioning is certainly a lot less painful. But again, Google will be taking 30% of every dollar that you earn. So when considering what we wanted to build for today, we wanted something that would add benefit to our client. We wanted an app that somebody could open in those times where they've got a few seconds or a few minutes spare, and something that we could produce inside an hour on a presentation such as this. Now, anybody who's not familiar with Harry Potter, this scene here depicts a moment where Dumbledore uses his wand and extracts a thought from his mind. Now, if J.K. Rowling had contacted me before she wrote the book, I'm pretty sure she'd have been happy to have him store it in a mobile device instead of the bowl. So I decided we'd build a simple thought tracking application. We're going to call it Pensive, because that's what the bowl was called in the show. And the idea is that we're going to be able to track our ideas, goals, aspirations, dreams, and you can do this anytime and anywhere. And best of all, you don't need to be a wizard or use magic to use it. Obviously, we're focusing cross-platform, and we're going to be storing the data in a SQL database. Now, when you start developing these apps, putting app number one into the App Store is usually a longer process than releasing updates. So my recommendation is you keep the features to a minimum in version 1. Here we can see that we're going to be adding, editing, and deleting thoughts. We're going to have the ability to mark thoughts as complete and also do some searching. For version 2, I may add the facility to post a thought to a social network such as Twitter or Facebook, and maybe allow the user to capture some photos or a bit of video footage as well. But the idea is to keep it simple. We could store the information on the device using the data store. We could store it on a hosted SQL server, which is what we're going to be demonstrating today, or we could even use something like Windows Azure SQL. Our table consists of 4 simple fields. We have the thought, we've got the unique ID, a done field, and the date that it gets added. Now, one of the other things when we look at mobile apps, there's a lot of artwork involved. If you're targeting Apple, you've got to design your icons that work on the base devices and also the Retina devices. So you've got 2 lots of artwork asset. You need to create an iTunes icon. You've got to come up with some loading screens. And then when you submit to the App Store, you have to do screenshots. The Google side of it, you've got your application icons, a web icon, screenshots, feature graphic, and they also require promo graphics should your app get selected for promotion. And then there's the issue of certificates. Now, certificates can be generated using a Windows PC. For the Apple side of things, you have to create provisioning profiles, but they're created in the developer portal, so it can be done in your web browser. And the steps required to actually create the certificates I'll make available on my blog later on today. So let's jump over to Visual Studio and start building our application. After you install the DXTREME toolset, you click on New Project, and you're going to see in the templates an entry called DXTREME HTML JavaScript. When this is selected, it will show you 4 options. So the first thing we're going to do is create the OData service. Now this could be done as either a Visual Basic or a C# project. We're going to use C# today. I'm going to name the project, so Pensive DS. And click OK. Now this wizard is built on top of the Entity Framework data wizard. So what we're going to be doing here is stepping through a standard data model wizard. The first step is to select Generate from Database. I'm going to create a new connection and select one of my local running SQL instances. Next, I'm going to select the database. So Pensive has already been created. It contains just that one table. Move on to the next option. Creates the connection strings. I'm leaving everything as standard there, and hit Next. Now I'm presented with a list of tables that are available to that database. I only have the one called Thoughts. I'm going to take this option here to say pluralize. The Entity Framework wizard sometimes gets confused if words end in S, so we'll take that off and select Finish. What we're going to end up with is this Pensive DS solution that is a wrapper around the Entity Framework, creating a data service or a web service that will publish that information and make it available to the rest of my application. It takes care of the insert, update, edit and delete functionality. And if there's nothing special, all I need to do is run that project now. So I'm going to run it up in Google Chrome. We will see that a local instance of iOS Express is run up. And after a second or so, we'll get the metadata provided by that service, showing that there is a Thoughts item available. I'm just going to take a copy of that URL for later, and then I can close the browser. So providing a web service that supports OData is just that simple. We step through the wizard, and we've now got something we can talk to. So the next step is to actually create the application. Again, I'm going to choose New Project. Now, inside the DXTREME Templates panel, we've got a basic application, which would be a blank canvas. I'm going to choose the multi-channel application. Give it its name as Pensive, and click OK. We see the DXTREME project wizard come up. Now this is really cool because I can select the platforms that I want to target. I could choose web, mobile, or Windows 8, or I could choose any combination thereof. Now because we're focusing on mobile today, I'm just going to choose mobile, and I'll select Next. We're now presented with a preview of what an application would look like on a device. It defaults to an iPhone. On the left-hand side, we can see navigation bar, or we can see slide out. So if I switch to slide out, it shows me what that would look like in place of the nav bar. Down the bottom, I can see iPhone and an arrow, so I click the arrow, and I now get to see how the application would look on an Android device. Again, I can check out what a slide out would look like. So straight away, I'm comfortable with what I'm building, and I can choose Next. The final step is the selection for the web service. I'm going to paste that URL in that we did before and hit Discover. And we can see that Thought has been exposed by the web service and allows me to select it. If I had multiple tables I was dealing with, they would show up in this process and I could select them as well. I hit Finish. And what we're going to see happen in the background here is a single solution gets created. Now at the moment, because we targeted only mobile, we have the mobile project and then we have the shared project. The shared project basically handles all the data binding. So if we were targeting multiple platforms at the same time, such as Windows 8 or the web, we would have additional projects in here. Now before we start looking at any of the code or how we can interact with that, I simply want to start the project and see what happens. So far, the DXTREME toolkit has done all the heavy lifting for me. What we're presented with is the mobile device simulator. You'll notice on the bottom left-hand corner is a QR code. Now DevExpress have published an application to both the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store called Courier. And if you download Courier onto your device, you can scan the QR code and actually see your application running on your device. There's no provisioning required. There's no having to use iTunes or drag IPA files around to test it. It's a really cool technology that will let you view the app and play with the app in real time on your device. Inside the simulator, we can see that we've got the option of portrait or landscape mode. I can change the zoom panel on the top left, top right. And on the left here, I can actually select what kind of Chrome I want this rendered in. So we're starting out with the iPhone. I can select the iPhone 5. If I come down to an Android device, it's going to render and show me what it would look like on an Android device. I've got support for an Android tablet, an iPad mini, and an iPad. So we'll switch back to the iPhone 5 as we take a look. Now what we're seeing on screen here is the Thoughts application that's been rendered. There's no results showing. We've got our slide out panel. So if I want to bring up the About screen, I can bring the About screen in. Now one thing to consider here, the toolkit's been built on Knockout, which allows us to build everything using the model view view model or MVVM principles. I'm going to click the Add button and I can see the panel slides in and I get to enter a thought. So one thought I might have today is I want to create a Harlem Shake video. I'm going to save. And we can see that that gets added into our list view. Now that's automatically been added via the web service into the database at the back end. I've got the ability of implementing the pull to refresh options, which would in iOS terms be part of the UI table view. If I add another entry, one goal I might have is to present a webinar to large audience. Obviously I'm not employed on my spelling. We'll save that and we can see the entry. I can click on an entry and I can view it. We can see the delete buttons become available, so I can delete items. Or I can edit an item and I can say, well, that item's now been done, so we can save. Go back and this information gets rendered directly onto the Chrome. So if I switch to Android again, we can see all those items displayed as they would on an Android device. The slide out panel, choose About, we get the About screen. So far we've got a pretty functional app without writing any code. So let's spend a minute looking at what's actually happening in the back. If we look at the Pensive mobile application, we can see that the application consists of some style sheets. It consists of some JavaScript that gets imported automatically. Here you'll see the DXTREME JavaScript files as well as jQuery and Knockout. And then I've got my layouts and views. So the thought folder was created automatically and all the necessary views were added. So we've got our detail view, We've got our edit view and our thoughts view. So if we open the DX view file, we can have a look at what's behind it. Try that again. Okay. On the left, we will see a canvas that will render. And on the right, we have a HTML style markup. We can see that we implement the DX role. We've got the view, and we can see that some of the tools that are shown in the toolbox on the left can be added directly to the file. So here we can see the DX list view, which is the item that renders the list box that we saw before. Now it may be, if we switch back to the details view for a second, that I want to hide the ID panel. Obviously, being HTML, one of the things I could do is just kill or delete everything inside that div tag. I don't want the ID showing when I render this. The other thing I can do is, using standard HTML and CSS, is I could say I want to apply a style, and I'm going to say display and select none. Now if I run this application again, select an item, we'll see that the ID is now missing. Obviously, using the styles, I can come back and add it back in at any time that I want, and we can see how easy it is to interact with some of those views. So now what I want to actually do is create a search function, so that I might have 100 or so items in my list, and I want to limit it as I go. So what I'm going to do is bring my thoughts view back up, move that off to the left, and we can see that the list box is here. Now on the left in my mobile widget panel, we've got a large number of DXTREME tools that we can use on the canvas. We've got everything from gallery controls, some nice visualization controls. We've got maps, list views, tile views. There's navigation bars and sliders. It's a really nice, rich list of controls. Now what I'm just going to try and do is switch from okay, so what we'll do is I'm going to add a text box into the view, and I'm going to position that before the list view. And in my text box, I'm going to want some text so that the user knows what it's all about. So I'm going to add a placeholder. And the placeholder is going to be search. I'm going to bind that with a value of search and set the mode to search. I need to add some code into the JavaScript file first. So I jump into thoughts.js. And at the moment, this is returning just the information straight from the web service. Implementing the knockout observable method and then adding a search function, I'm going to filter the information here. So on the data source, I'm selecting filter, and I want to filter the field thought that contains whatever value I'm passing in from the search box. So if I run that, we're going to see we have our search box. What we're going to do is just switch the application from a navbar application into from a slide out into a navbar. So here I can jump in and Okay. Okay. So we've implemented our filter, and we're going to be able to see what happens there. Sorry, just having a minor issue with Visual Studio. Pensive. Okay. So pensive.config. I'm going to change this from slider to navbar and run that. We can see the change here. We're going to see the navbar. Now, there's two ways to look at debugging an application within the framework. I'm using Google Chrome here at the moment, and if I wanted to use the normal debug step through, I could switch to Internet Explorer, which allows you that tight integration. Now, one of the key aspects when we've got our application to a stage where we want to look at deploying it is implementing some of those artwork assets. We need to also select our certificates. Sorry, that Visual Studio issue caused me a minor lapse. So inside the actual mobile project, we've got the ability to link into the different hardware capabilities. So if I wanted my application to interact with the camera or the GPS or the contacts, or PhoneGap framework allows us to expose that. And we can nominate very quickly inside this capabilities tab what we want to interact with. So we have an application that we want to start looking to deploy. The next step would be nominating or getting ready for deployment to the relative stores. We can select the version information here, and then we need to apply our certificate. Now, I took the liberty of creating some certificates early on, and as I said, I'll make those steps available on the blog a little later. If we go to projects, I've got an assets file. I've got my Android certificate file here. Because we're targeting a lot of devices, there's a lot of artwork to consider. So for the Android package, I've got all these elements. Now, I know that the screen refresh is going to be a little slow, but I'm just going to whip through and select each of these artwork assets so that we can do a successful build. So we have our application icon and our web icon. Now, one of the things to think about when we're deploying to the store, how many people have gone into the App Store, whether it be Apple or Google, and bought an application purely based on how cool the icon looks? So it's important that you work either with a designer or get some nice artwork produced when you're doing these things. I've got the similar options inside the iOS package where I can select the version. I get to choose my iOS certificate. And being an iOS application, I also have to select a provisioning profile. Again, I'll whip through and select the artwork. Now, if you were to try and import the wrong style artwork or the wrong size, you'll get prompted. So you can't make a mistake at that level. 320. Unfortunately, because the Apple world has so many different devices and different screen resolutions, there's a fair few to select. So I'll go through and do these. 768, 1004. It's always also worthwhile when you're doing this to make sure that the screenshots and the icons that you're choosing will be appealing to the user. 1024. 46. And then finally the iTunes artwork. Once we've completed that step, the next step is to actually build for a native package. Let's close all those windows. If we right-click on the project, we've got a Build Native Package option. When I select this, I'm going to be presented with a nice dialog that shows me the certificates that I've already included and the provisioning profile. And all that's left for me to do is type in the password. And the same for the iOS password. Now I can build the individual applications. Or I can build all. And what's happening in the background is using the PhoneGap build process, we can actually automatically create both the APK for Android and the IPA for iOS. You'll notice there's quite a disparity or difference in sizes between the Android package and the iOS package. And that's purely because of the additional artwork required for Retina screen sizes. You have to create the high resolution files, which tends to bloat those packages. At that point, I'd be ready to upload these packages to the relevant stores. That process differs between the two. Now, from an Apple point of view, when you create your provisioning profile and your certificate file, it's done in the developer portal. When it's time to actually deploy or create your app profile for the Apple Store, it's done inside iTunes Connect. I'm not going to take you through every screen here because it would be rather long and drawn out, but Apple step you through a number of processes, making sure that you have got all the relevant screenshots. You get to select what pricing tier you want, when you want the app available from, and some confirmation as to the suitability of the app. Exactly the same process on the Google Play Store side of it. The difference is that it's certainly less painful when we do the Google Play Store. At that point, you've submitted your application, you've created your packages, you've submitted your application, and then you wait. As a first-time developer, the wait could be anything from a week to a month, and so you usually get to wait a little more. Now, rejection from the store is quite frequent, and that's usually because you haven't adhered to some of the human interface design guidelines for Apple. And certainly it could be that you've infringed a trademark or using a picture that you shouldn't be using. The teams in both stores work quite closely with the developers to get those things resolved. But the beauty is that finally you get published and you've got your application in the App Store. So what we're going to do before we jump into the frequently asked questions, I'm just going to recreate that application and show the search functionality. So starting out, we're going to choose a navbar application. One of the things that I did last time was select the slide out, and we seem to have a couple of minor issues at that point. When I created the search for the data source there, the actual search is occurring at the web service level. It's not pulling all the data down to the device, but it's actually sending that filter. So I'm going to create Pensive 2 as a multi-channel on a mobile navbar. I have my running web service, which is still there, so I can click on so, copy, And the beauty with the DXTREME toolset is obviously I can quickly recreate this application and get to that point. So I select Finish. Here's my application. Now if I take a look at the multi-channel, Pensive 3, mobile, next, my web service, discover, thought, finish. I have my thoughts view. I jump in. We're going to see the canvas appear on the left-hand side. With the canvas, I get to select the orientation, so I can switch to landscape or leave it at portrait. I get to have a look at what the app's going to render like in the canvas. Let's just change that resolution up to 150 so I can switch back to iOS. And I have some preset device sizes that allows me to take a look at it as well. What we did the first time was to introduce here, we're going to say style equals display and set that to none. And we'll see in real time that that disappears from the canvas. Close that view and save. And now I'm going to take a look at the thoughts list view again. This time set it to 150. We've got the text field. Drag that over before my list. Enter the placeholder information. So we've got placeholder, and that is going to be set to search. We're going to set the value to search and the mode to search. Save that. We'll see the text box is rendered on the canvas, and jump into the binding again and place in the extra filtering that we said. So as I was saying before, this filter is occurring on the server side. So it's limiting the data that's going to be coming back to our application. And if we run that, we're going to see that I didn't bind my search correctly. It's because we've got Pensive 3 as opposed to Pensive. Run. And we can see that we've got the search box and the information. Here I want to search for anything with shake, and I'm going to get the shake entry. If I decide I want to see other things, I can clear that search and it will bring everything back. I want to go webinar, and I get my webinar results. So now we've got a couple of frequently asked questions. So the first question is, okay, what is the relationship between these HTML5 JavaScript components and our traditional .NET tools? Well, quite simply, the answer is that we've got customers who are more familiar with the JavaScript and HTML technology, and we support both technologies. That's why we've got both brands now. How do you create a certificate? It's a pretty straightforward process. There are some tools that you can download and use. I'll have that completed on my blog today so you can step through, and that will include the Android and the Apple WDC side of things. Can I use other JavaScript frameworks? The short answer is absolutely. You can introduce other frameworks. Obviously, we expose all the PhoneGap and the technology is built on the top of Knockout and uses jQuery. Can you alter the CSS files? Again, absolutely. The concept behind DXTREME is that you don't have to do the work behind the scenes to make your application look and feel native. We're doing that. But if you head over to the DXTREME Learning Center, it's a great place to start when looking at this particular technology. Inside the Help Center, it goes into detail both on what DXTREME is all about. It's got a great section on getting started and how to build a small application. And then it goes into more detail on each and every one of the widgets and how they can be used and implemented. And inside the Help Center, there's also a section on how to change the themes, extend the themes, or build your own. And then we've got the data visualization widgets such as charts, engages, and some of the really cool stuff that you can do with DXTREME. So we've successfully created an application that consumes a web service that will work natively on an iOS or Android device and make it available to package to the relevant store inside an hour using DXTREME. What we'll do now is hand over to Amanda and see what questions have come through.
Great, thank you, Paul. We have had a ton of questions coming through, and our awesome support team has been answering them behind the scenes. Here's one we haven't gotten to yet. How would one add additional data items or tables to the app? From Shane.
Okay, if you want to add additional tables, you would, well, the simplest thing, because it's not built around the entity framework, so there's no easy way to merge those files, you would really create another app and then bring those files in. So at that point, it's always a good idea to have your table structure or your design solid at the beginning. If you wanted to just add an extra field, that's an easy process of jumping into the source file and just creating an extra binding for that field. Now, the actual table of the data wizard, the OData service, will pick up automatically any new fields that are added to the table anyway. So you're only updating the application code.
Great, and we keep getting the question about how much DXTREME costs, and the DXTREME subscription is $899.99 for an annual subscription. So that's the answer to that question. Let's see, how is it possible to do a multiple page app?
It's based around SPA or single page application. So the short answer would be no.
Okay. Is there a capability to interact with the phone's calendar? From Charlie.
Based on the PhoneGap framework, yes, absolutely. It exposes contacts, calendar, and other key options based on the underlying architecture of the device.
Great, and let's see. Do we have to use a web service or can we use AJAX calls?
You don't have to use a web service. It's like any HTML JavaScript solution. If you're building it as a website, you can interact. It really needs to consume JSON data. And there's a recent post, I think, by Scott Hanselman as to the fact that everybody should be using JSON. But certainly, you're not limited just to being able to consume a web service or the type of OData service we built today.
Great, and from Sean, what's the performance like compared to the native apps, those written in Java for Android and in Objective-C for iOS?
So it's running as a WebView application. Performance is really quite nice on a device. I don't know that you're ever going to get a true comparison between something written at the low level with Objective-C to something running as a rendered JavaScript solution. But certainly there's no performance issues when running some nice applications inside something like DXTREME.
Great. And also from Sean, does it obfuscate the code when it builds it?
I don't believe any minification is happening directly. I'm going to pass this one over to the team and see if they can help me out.
Okay. All right, team, you hear that? We need an answer. Let's see. Availability of other device features like GPS, the camera, etc.
Well, that's all provided by the PhoneGap framework. So back inside the actual project, so if we switch to the project and we go to the project properties, you'll see we've got this capabilities function, which is where you can nominate what capabilities you want to interact with, and that updates the config file that PhoneGap uses and allows you to interact with that information.
What about support for offline data storage like SQLite?
Again, because we're basing it on existing frameworks, so the DXTREME toolset isn't a replacement framework for what's there. So offline data storage is already available in the likes of PhoneGap, so absolutely. Inside the DXTREME Learning Center, there's a comprehensive section on all the different storage models and methods and some examples of how best to use them.
What about BlackBerry devices, Paul, from Dave?
No. I'm not sure whether you can run a JS solution on BlackBerry, so if I had to answer it, I'd say no, unless anybody on the team wants to override that.
Okay. And then what about, can a partial view be added at runtime, and if so, how?
Not sure I fully understand the question.
Okay. I think it's Sujith. If you want to clarify, maybe we can answer.
Yeah, maybe just send me an email and we can have a chat about exactly what you're asking and post a response up on the blog as well.
Okay. From Michael, what about NFC?
If it's exposed by PhoneGap, you're going to be able to obviously interact with it. It's the hardware-related questions are all related to the underlying PhoneGap framework, which you can find more out at on the PhoneGap website. I'll post links to that as well. And likewise, with some of the cool things you can achieve with Knockout, I'll put links up to the knockoutjs.com website.
Great. And then is there a built-in SSL for secure data from Alistair?
No, not that I'm aware of.
All right. And then our last question, everybody, and Paul, we're not going to get to everything today, but Paul is doing a blog post following up to this webinar, and it will be available on our website. I posted the link to his blog in the chat box a couple of times. Here's our last question. It's, why should I buy DXTREME and not other HTML5 frameworks such as Sencha?
I have to be biased at this point. One of the things that I've found is a lot of it comes down to the flexibility, support, and obviously from a DevExpress point of view, we're investing a lot of resource into this technology, and we're bringing, with the .NET stuff that we've got out there and now the JavaScript, it just becomes a strong solution. At the end of the day, it has to be the developer's choice, but the DXTREME toolset, as we've seen, will allow you to create some amazing apps in a very quick time. Plus, it's not anybody that's tried to work in Sencha, it's not really that easy to get to grips with. So from a starting point, from a take-up and learning curve, DXTREME all the way.
Great answer. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for all of those questions. And again, like I said, Paul will post a follow-up blog post answering a lot of these questions and a follow-up to this webinar. So you can visit devexpress.com/webinars for our upcoming webinar sessions. Our next session is live on March 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and covers enterprise-ready reporting. Empower your users with the DevExpress report server. If you create, customize, or manage reports, this webinar is for you. And you can also give Universal 12.2 and DXTREME a spin by downloading the free 30-day trial at devexpress.com/trial. All right, everybody. Thanks again to Paul for a fantastic presentation. Thank you to Code Project for hosting us. And, of course, thank you all for joining us. Let's see what develops. Bye-bye.